If a reactor core finds water beneath, it can easily react with it and cause a steam-powered hydrovolcanic explosion. Digging and catching up to these three very hot runaway reactor cores in order to encase them in concrete. To prevent this would be a monumental task for TEPCO. Each reactor core already has a 500-day lead on any search and entombment party. TEPCO have cried poor already on issues of the Daiichi nuclear plant cleanup and have so far based their responses on cost and shareholder considerations. Next, there is the matter of the plutonium-laden seawater that has been repatriated back into the Pacific Ocean. It has been projected that it will take 5 years for the radioactive plutonium seawater to encompass the whole of the Pacific Ocean. There is little indication that the plutonium release into the ocean has been halted to this day. Bluefin tuna have already shown up on the California coast with radioactive cesium in their bodies. The seafood basket of the world, the Pacific Ocean, along with its ecosystems and biodiversity, is imperiled beyond all measure. The consumption of any Pacific seafood must be vigorously discouraged, yet little has been done to prohibit it. Even green groups have been relatively silent on this issue for reasons unknown.
The New York Times is reporting that 200 tons of radioactive liquid are being poured into the nuclear reactors and the fuel pool at Fukushima every day. Well, where's it going? If it's going in, it's coming out. And it's coming out two ways. It's coming out as radioactive steam, and it's coming out as radioactive water. Offshore radioactive readings in the ocean have gone up and are now over 3,000 times higher than the standards that are routinely expected. That's not coming from the air. The ocean's too big to be polluted by what's coming out of the airborne releases. It's clearly leaking from the trenches into the ocean. They haven't found the leak, but the only source of quantities of radioactive material large enough to pollute the ocean has got to be leakage from these trenches.
Finally, the last escalator is reactor number 4 at the very heart of the Fukushima Daiichi plant. Reactor 4 itself was empty, but it housed a very large and uncontained spent nuclear fuel pool on its roof. Due to the explosion, the Reactor 4 building is severely damaged and has 1,535 fuel rod assemblies that are immersed in water but exposed to the air and the elements. They are also stacked high in the air on elevated racks like mere warehouse inventory. Moving these rods must be done while immersed in water and in heavily protected structures in an environment that is now highly radioactive. The crane equipment designated to perform this task was destroyed in the tsunami. Work has only just started now, in late 2012, on reinforcing Reactor Building 4 with a view to removing the 1,535 fuel assemblies. The projected time that it will take to secure and remove the fuel assemblies is 2.5 to 3 years, so sometime in 2015 or 2016. Another 7 or 8 magnitude earthquake is all that it would take to collapse the building and allow the fuel rods to crash to the ground, exposing them to the air and sparking the burning of all that cesium into the atmosphere. Such a fire cannot be put out with water once it is ignited. Contact with water creates a pyrophoric reaction in which oxygen from the water itself is extracted by the super hot rods to continue and enhance the burning and thus affect the release of radiation and cesium. Even a rocket-propelled grenade attack by North Korean frogmen would do in Reactor 4. The collapse of this single building would be so catastrophic, since the subsequent release of the 1,535 fuel assemblies would easily trigger a huge radiological fire that would quickly spread to a nearby common spent fuel pool a mere 50 meters away, with a further 6,375 fuel assemblies. This represents about 50 times the amount of radioactive cesium released from Chernobyl. There are a further 3,511 spent fuel assemblies in the Daiichi plant, and if they were absorbed into the fire also, it would be a cesium release 85 times that of Chernobyl. Mitsuhei Murata, a respected diplomat and former Japanese ambassador to Sweden, declared that if Reactor 4 collapses, the whole of the Earth's northern hemisphere would have to be evacuated, and does not rule out a global human extinction event. Nuclear scientist Arne Gundersen and physician Helen Caldecott have both stated that they would leave the northern hemisphere if Reactor 4 collapsed.
However, if there's another earthquake and Building 4 collapses, which contains the cooling pool with fresh fuel, I'm going to evacuate my family from Boston.
If the spent fuel pool at Reactor 4 hits the ground, that is literally the end of Tokyo, Yokohama, and most of Honshu. There's no question about it. It has visually been observed to be leaning in the past month.
That the rest of the world is doing nothing to help the Japanese because it's going to poison us in North America, Europe, all the way around the world.
Every damn scientist, the best of the best from Europe, Russia, China, America, should be in Japan or studying this around the clock and making recommendations. They got to get not only outside the box, they got to get outside the planet to start thinking about this, or there isn't going to be any planet left. It's that bad.
Right.
The tonnage just in spent fuel pool number 4 is over 260 tons of rods, fuel rods. And remember, they were new ones. Most of them are used. This is what we're told anyway. There were MOX fuel rods in there, and when a fuel rod has lived its useful life, boiling water, it's far more dangerous than it was as a brand new fuel rod that first gets inserted into the reactor vessel. It's all nuts.
It would almost certainly spark mass evacuations to the southern hemisphere. It is indeed very possible that the radioactive scourge could engulf the entire planet and spark a major die-off of the human species and the animal and plant life we live alongside and depend upon. The characters in On the Beach knew they were doomed from the outset. Yet more than a gloomy surrender film, On the Beach was ironically a plea to its audience. The banner declaring there is still time was perhaps a desperate cry from the year 1959 to the future to highlight the potential dangers and horrors of nuclear power and radiation in order to galvanize its audiences to make better choices, take action, and demand answers to bring about happier tomorrows. The inexplicable absence of any credible government or multilateral response, or even reasonable coverage from mass media outlets, suggests that these institutions are captured by the international nuclear industry. It seems we the people are alone on this one. There is still time not to savor before we die, but to speak out and act in order that we and our brethren do not die out. If we act, we may be able to salvage something of our environment and protect our children. If inaction and indifference is to be our response, then we are, for all intents and purposes, no matter where we live across the globe, all standing on Fukushima Beach together, waiting for the lethal radiation to take us en masse. We will be judged by our children, one way or another.